Today's teardown is on my favorite engine of all time. I mean, not my favorite engine of all time. This is a 2.3 liter Mazdaspeed 3, Mazdaspeed 6, or CX-7 4-cylinder turbo engine known as the MZR. And I've done another teardown on one of these before. I think I complained the entire time, which is just in my nature. But I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to stay tight-lipped. That might be a lie too. Anyway, we're going to get this core torn down. I don't know anything about it other than the fact that the timing cover has been off of it. It has no crank pulley. It has no spark plugs, and I think it's sat outside. So this might be kind of fun. The reason I'm tearing this one down now and not some of the others, I ran out of parts for these. I sold everything I had for these, and I need to get some more parts up into inventory, and I had this on the shelf for a few months, so it is time to kill it. Anyway, let me show you what we're working with. Now this engine has a lot of really good parts on it still, and it is also missing some parts that I do sell quite a bit. Someone has thieved the high pressure fuel pump off of it, which is super common when I buy these cores. There's also no turbo, no throttle body, and unfortunately I can hear water jiggling around in there, so that's going to be kind of fun. But I did notice one thing interesting. This engine has a heat tab on it. This is a tab that a lot of salvage yards will use a heat gun and glue these to the sides of the block, and if this falls off, that means the engine was overheated. It's kind of a warranty protection concept, but this is from the yard I got it from, which means, or at least it tells me, that this engine was sold. It was a used engine from a wrecked vehicle. It was sold and it got returned because either they put it in and it failed during the warranty period, or maybe they found an issue before they got it installed. Either way, the fact that the timing cover's been off is kind of worrisome, and the no spark plugs. I think we're going to find some reasons for why this was returned, and we're going to get hopefully a lot of good parts out of it. Since there are no plugs to pull, the first thing we're going to do is pull the valve cover, which is only held down by a few of these. The rest of them are loose. And there's definitely signs that water got in here. There's rust on the cams and pitting on the cams, so those are not going to be worth doing anything with, which is kind of unfortunate, but you know, I kind of knew that when I picked this thing up. Something I noticed when I pulled the valve cover off, aside from the normal varnish, that's not really exceptional or anything, but this metal plate, which is directly above the oil fill, has a significant groove worn in that. And that's not an area where the timing chain normally, when that's chain stretches, that it normally would wear. It usually will wear up here, kind of in the center, but where the slack would be between the intake and exhaust cam. So what I think happened is someone had to add oil to this frequently, or maybe it just took one time, and then they pulled the oil cap off and jammed a funnel as far down as they possibly could, which bent this, because this is very easy to bend, into the cam gear, and the cam gear kind of self-clearanced itself, and then life went on. Now we're going to get started on the timing cover, but we're going to first pull the water pump pulley off. That's not the right bolt. Now it's time to pull the intake manifold, and to do that we got to pull the EGR pipe off and pull the fuel supply line off. There's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to come off. Uh-oh, that's not the right size. Who did that? Someone has the wrong bolt in this. It looks like a 12, I'm going to guess, and it's a Toyota bolt. Oh, come on, let go. I know it's going to... There's some gas. And I need those bolts anyway. And that's what the back of the intake valves look like. Pretty carboned up, but that's about normal for a CX-7. I don't see as much carbon on the speed cars. Those cars are typically driven a little bit harder. So I'd like to point out something before I start stripping all the timing components off. You can spin this. This is the cam and crank on these engines are not keyed. The only thing that keeps this together is the friction. There's friction washers here, and the crank pulley kind of sandwiches everything together, which is why having the right timing tools to time one of these is absolutely the only way you're going to get one in time. The timing process is pretty convoluted for a 4-cylinder, if you ask me, but there's some people that think that it's a walk in the park, but they clearly haven't worked on old Mazdas that they would know better. Well, that's not going to take that off. I don't even know why I tried. I feel like I'm selling jewelry here, but let's talk about the timing chain from this engine. This is the timing chain from this 2.3 MZR, and the only chain I had laying around for comparison's sake is the one out of the VR30 DDTT that I just took apart in the last video. And I get that they're totally different engines made by different manufacturers, but look at the construction difference. They both do the same thing, and there's significantly more material on the Nissan chain than the Mazda chain. And I wish I had one here to compare. The naturally aspirated 2.3 and 2.5, which doesn't drive a high-pressure fuel pump, doesn't have that load, has a much thicker chain, a much better built chain than the turbo engine. And the only thing that I can understand from this, that I could guess from this, is that there was some sort of packaging constraints where they couldn't put a bigger chain in here because of space. And if that's the case, I just don't think I would use space as my out for making such an inferior product. This is, a lot of people have spent a lot of money having these chains replaced over the years, especially on CX-7s, and it just seems like some bean counter thought that this would do. Next, we're going to crack all the cam cap bolts loose, zip them out, and pull the cams. At first glance, this doesn't look too bad. There's a little bit of grooves in a couple of these, especially on this exhaust cam here. Intake looks good. Usually that's the one that's torn up the most. But not too bad. Not perfect, but not too bad. The cams tell about the same story. Again, the lobes have some rust from water entering that engine. And there is some scoring, some grooves, but nothing terrible. Nothing that I can feel with my fingernail through the glove. Looks about what you'd expect. Now it's time to pull the head bolts out and see what we're working with. Okay, let's get this head off. Please don't turn me into Miles Davis, please. Well, this is gonna be fun. Getting these out with all this rust in here. Great. Look how carboned up these are. I don't see any marks on the pistons from valve contact. Nothing yet. Anyway, I can't really tell anything on those other than they had water contact. Maybe. See those two little lines right there? That could be from exhaust valves making contact. The head has normal signs of water around the exhaust valves over here, but I don't see any signs that these made contact other than two little spots right here. So maybe this was a timing issue, I'm not quite sure. Before I flip this engine upside down, I'm going to try to pull the oil filter off so I get an idea what the oil looks like in here. It is a CarQuest oil filter, which, well, not my favorite thing to see. It is very on there. Very on there. Good Lord. Oh, man. I moved it. That counts. I should probably use filter wrench. That would be smart, right? No, I'll just keep doing this the hard way. It's got pretty clean looking oil in it. Yeah, oil looks pretty decent. I mean, it would go with the story of someone putting this in a car and finding a problem with it. Okay, let's flip this ding dong over. Well, that coolant looks great. Actually, that's out of the oil pan. Yeah, I think I'm gonna crack the drain plug loose. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, that's just water with a little bit of oil. And like I said, this thing sat outside for quite some time, so this would make sense. All right, let's finish turning this thing upside down. And in case anybody's wondering, the W on your oil does not stand for water, even though on this engine, it kind of does. Time to pull the pan, and it's just a whole bunch of 10mm bolts. These are pretty easy. Well, that's appetizing. I feel like a lot of that's just from having water sitting in there. I don't see anything else awry yet. Let's get this pickup off. Now it's time to pull the counterbalance cartridge. I don't see anything sticking out. These have about the normal amount of movement in their journal. I can't really get to 1 and 4, just 2 and 3 at this point. That's going to be kind of a challenge. We're going to try to turn the crank over. Let's see if we can get that to move. Oh yeah, that moves nice and easy. I might get a good crank out of this. Huh. It's going to be the first time in a long time that that's happened. Not going to count my chickens yet. Let's go ahead and get the rods and pistons out of it, then I'll pull the oil pump and all that stuff, and yeah, we'll get it apart. Bearing for number 2. It's got some pretty good sized grooves in it. And it's scored up a little bit, but it's not terrible. Crank looks nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Let's get that rod piston out. Ha! I forgot there is rust. Well, let's do the next cylinder and we'll figure out what to do about the rust dilemma. Come on, get off of there. Yeah, that looks the same. It's scored up, but it's not bad. Journal looks pretty decent, and I can't push the rods down in their cylinders, so that is going to be fun. Let's figure out how we're going to get those out. So what I think I'm going to do, at least my first plan here, is to use my long punch here in one of the drilled weight holes in the crank and rock the crank back and forth and use the rings to kind of break up that rust and hopefully get them to the top of their bore. I don't know if that's going to work or not, but I'm going to try. That's what I can do, right? I can try. I'm getting it further. All right, it's about as far as I can get it to go. Now we're going to give it the crank a couple taps with the mallet, just a little tappy tap there. See if we can. It's moving. Let's see if we can back this out of here. Sad thing is, this is about halfway. Last thing I want to do is mar up this crankshaft. It's one of the most expensive parts of the motor. It's moving now. Yeah. Excellent. Let's get these other two caps off. See what lies behind door number 1 and 4. Yeah, it's got a little damage. It's not bad. Very comparable to 2 and 3. Now that one doesn't want to come off. Yeah, it's not too bad. I have definitely seen much worse. So let's see if we can get... I'm going to push these down and then we're going to pull the crank out. Let's get these other two caps off. Took a couple tappy taps. The mains look really nice, actually. That rear main has some pretty significant damage. Let's see if the crank shows any signs. Now I'll have to clean that up to find that out. Before I can pull the crank, I have to get the chain off the oil pump here, and there's only a couple ways to do this. And I don't know if it's all going to work. Yeah, that works. Go ahead and get the oil pump out of the way while we are here. These should always be bought new. That's going to end up in the scrap bin. One other thing I like about these engines, and I'm actually not lying here, they have tool holders. I guess you have, when you work on them so often, you want you to have a place to keep your screwdrivers and your punch. Anyway, let's get the crank out. Let's go ahead and push the rods and pistons out. Here are the rods and pistons out of this engine. They actually don't look too bad. The bearings are pretty tired. They're definitely not bad enough to cause a knock. They do have some grooves. But again, I don't think this is why this engine was a core or a bad engine. I don't think that at all. There's no damage to the tops of the pistons. There's nothing melted. Nothing looks weird. I've seen all of those situations, but nothing here. And the crank looks just fantastic. This is the nicest crank I've had in at least 2 years. And I've done several of these engines. I just don't get a lot of good cranks. It's almost always an oiling issue. And this looks pretty good. And where that damaged main that we found was, it's really not bad. I can't feel anything with my fingernails. I think it's quite fine. The block, on the other hand, it's not terrible. I can't feel anything with my fingernails. But the water has definitely done some damage. There's some pitting, some water stains, some rust stains. It's a little bit of damage right here, right at where that flashlight is. It almost looked like it melted a piston, but I couldn't find any issues with the piston itself, so I'm not quite sure what that's from. And these were the two super rusty cylinders, and you can see there's evidence of that at the bottom. I'm just amazed I was able to get those out as easily as they were. This was likely a really nice block before it got rained in and let water sit in it, but you know, I can't control everything with these cores, unfortunately. There isn't always an obvious failure with these engines. They don't always have a rod hanging outside of them. In this case, all we have to go on is what we found when we first saw the engine and we took it apart. And I know we found some tired bearings inside, but I'm not convinced that that's why that engine was deemed bad. I think it had something to do with the timing chain. It was clear to me someone tried to verify the timing or retime it. We found that the crank pulley and crank pulley bolt were both missing on that engine. Also, the plug on the side of the block that you remove to put the tool that locks the crank in place when you do time it, that was missing as well. And I couldn't verify timing without the crank pulley or the crank pulley bolt. If you try to turn the cams with the crank not being keyed, the crank will not move. Either way, I got a lot of really good parts from this engine. It's pretty rare, actually. That's probably the best MZR I've had in a year and a half. I know the block will take a little cleanup, but the rest of those parts look pretty nice. If you'd like to buy parts from this engine or any of the other engines I've torn down, I'm going to leave our email in the description. And as always, I love all the comments, all the suggestions, and even when I get corrected, I love it all. And I'll catch you on the next one.